Imagine a leader who smiles warmly, speaks the language of freedom, and reassures you that every choice you make is your own, yet without your noticing, has already decided the range of choices you're allowed to have. You vote, you cheer, you feel the thrill of participation, but the script of the play was written long before you entered the theater. This is the paradox of our time. We live in systems that promise liberty, but operate on the quiet architecture of control. We tell ourselves we are free citizens, yet our laws, our news, even the way we think about freedom itself, often come prepackaged by forces we never elected and cannot name. Plato saw this coming over 2,000 years ago. In the Republic, he warned that democracies, left unchecked, have an almost tragic trajectory. They begin with the dream of equality for all, but gradually slide toward chaos, manipulation, and finally, tyranny. But in our age, tyranny wears a suit and tie. It speaks in press conferences, not battle speeches. It tells you it's serving you while quietly ensuring you serve it. The great danger isn't that we will wake up one morning to find democracy replaced by dictatorship. It's that the change happens so slowly and so politely that we won't notice it at all. This video is not about cynicism, it's about seeing clearly, because once you see the subtle mechanics of how power works in so-called free societies, you can resist becoming its passive subject. Over the next hour, we will explore 6 deep insights drawn from philosophy, psychology, and history that will reframe how you see democracy, authority, and your own role within them. These aren't abstract theories, they are living truths that shape the choices you make every day, often without your awareness. We'll listen to Plato, yes, but also to Machiavelli, Nietzsche, Jung, and others who studied the shadow side of human governance. We'll unmask the hidden bargains that make modern democracy look free while functioning like a polite dictatorship. And more importantly, will discover what it truly means to live freely in an age of subtle control. The curtain has already risen. The question is whether you're watching the play or playing your part in it blindly. A few years ago, a journalist interviewed citizens in a prosperous, democratic nation. He asked them a simple question: if you could change one law in your country, what would it be? Most people laughed nervously and said, I don't fit no, things are fine, I guess. One man replied, I'm sure the experts know better than me. And that was it. The conversation ended there. That exchange stayed with me, not because it revealed oppression, but because it revealed contentment. People weren't angry, they weren't afraid, they were comfortable, and in comfort, they had stopped imagining that things could be otherwise. Plato would have recognized this immediately. In the Republic, he describes the slow erosion of democracy into tyranny. At first, people demand equality and the right to live as they please. But over time, this freedom grows excessive. Citizens, intoxicated by the idea that no one should tell them what to do, begin to resent authority of any kind: teachers, judges, even the law itself. Eventually, this chaos creates a hunger for order, and the people willingly hand over power to a single strong figure who promises to protect them. But in our age, the process is far more subtle. The strong figure is not always a dictator in uniform. It can be a system, a network, a culture that quietly shapes your thinking so you never dream of leaving the boundaries it has set. This is what I call the invisible cage. It doesn't need locks. It doesn't need guards. It works by convincing you that life inside is the fullest expression of freedom you could ever have. The cage isn't built of steel, it's built of stories, slogans, and assumptions. In Plato's allegory of the cave, prisoners are chained in darkness, watching shadows on a wall. To them, the shadows are reality. When one prisoner escapes and sees the sunlit world beyond, he returns to tell the others, but they laugh at him. They don't want to leave. Why would they? The shadows are familiar. Modern democracies have mastered a more sophisticated cave. Here, the shadows are not crude illusions, but well produced media, education systems, and political narratives that keep you feeling informed and free, while quietly narrowing your imagination of what's possible. This is why Plato's warning still matters. Freedom without vigilance can become its own form of imprisonment, not by removing your rights outright, but by shaping your desires so you never use them meaningfully. A person in a cage knows they are captive. A person in an invisible cage believes they are free and will even defend the walls that confine them. So the first step toward real freedom is in set rebellion against authority. It sets the inner work of noticing the bars you can set see. Ask yourself, which of my beliefs come from my own experience, and which were handed to me pre-formed? Which choices in my life are truly mine, and which were designed for me by forces I don't see? Am I willing to risk discomfort to step outside the familiar shadows? Plato's answer was clear. Without the courage to leave the cave, democracy will not save you. The form of freedom is nothing without the substance of freedom. And in our time, the greatest danger is not that someone will take your liberty away, but that you will quietly give it away without even noticing it's gone. A few years ago, during an election season, a television station aired a live debate between two candidates. They spoke passionately about taxes, healthcare, and education. The audience applauded at all the right moments. It looked like democracy in action. But behind the cameras, in rooms the public would never see, consultants were deciding which topics could even be discussed. Advisors had combed through polling data to identify words that would test well with different voter groups. Speechwriters had already crafted lines that would generate applause. In the control room, producers decided which camera angles would capture the right emotional moments. By the time the debate reached your screen, you weren't seeing two leaders wrestling with ideas. You were watching a carefully produced performance, and the true rulers of that moment, the ones shaping not only what was said, but what could be thought, never appeared on stage. Machiavelli understood this dynamic centuries ago. In The Prince, he advises rulers to master the art of appearance, to seem virtuous, to seem generous, to seem democratic, while in truth pursuing their own goals and securing their power through careful manipulation of perception. But in our age, the Machiavellian prince is rarely a single man in a palace. Today, the prince is a network, political strategists, corporate donors, intelligence agencies, media conglomerates, and transnational interest groups. They do not all conspire in smoky rooms. Reality is far more complex, but together they form an ecosystem of influence so pervasive that the face of power is almost never the true seat of power. Plato warned that in democracy, the leader eventually becomes a servant, not to the people's good, but to the people's whims. Machiavelli, more cynical, would add the leader becomes a servant to those who can control the people's whims in the first place. And here's the paradox. In modern democracies, the vote is real, but the menu is curated. You can choose your meal, but you don't choose the restaurant, and you rarely see the chef. The danger of the ruler who never wears a crown is that they cannot be held accountable in the ways a visible monarch can. You can't vote them out. You can't even name them half the time. They operate in the shadows of policy briefings, corporate boardrooms, intelligence reports, and donor retreats, places that have no public seating. This is why it's naive to believe that democracy alone guarantees freedom. A system can have elections and still be ruled by an unelected web of influence. A parliament can meet weekly while the real decisions are made over private dinners between powerful donors and political insiders. So, what can you do in the face of power that hides behind a smiling public mask? You start by refusing to confuse visibility with reality. The person on the podium is not the whole story. The televised debate is not the whole truth. The official statement is rarely the whole picture. As Machiavelli wrote, men judge generally more by the eye than by the hand, for everyone can see, but few can feel. In other words, most people are content to watch the performance. The rare person, the truly free citizen, learns to feel for the hidden hand. The question is, when you look at your leaders, are you seeing a ruler or only the mask they are allowed to wear? In ancient Rome, when the empire was restless, the emperors discovered a simple formula to keep the people quiet: bread and circuses. Give the citizens free grain and lavish entertainment, gladiator games, chariot races, theatrical performances, and they would be too distracted to notice political corruption, economic inequality, or the slow erosion of their freedoms. The poet Juvenal called this out bluntly: the people once who bestowed commands, consulships, legions, and all else now meddle no more and long eagerly for just two things: bread and circuses. 2,000 years later, the formula has not changed. Only the technology has. Today's bread might be consumer convenience, endless goods delivered to your door, 1,000 streaming services, the promise that you can have anything you want with a click. The circuses, a constant flood of media, reality shows, viral trends, celebrity scandals, sports rivalries, and political drama packaged like entertainment. The problem is not entertainment itself. Joy, art, and rest are vital to human life. The danger is when comfort becomes anesthesia, when distraction replaces participation, and when the spectacle becomes more real to us than reality. Noam Chomsky, one of the sharpest critics of modern political culture, argued that in so called free societies, power often works by manufacturing consent. You don't have to force people into obedience if you can shape the topics they care about, the fears they feel, and the range of acceptable debates they're willing to have. Think of it this way: if you're given three television channels, you can only choose from those three. Even if you flip between them freely, you're still operating within the boundaries someone else set for you. Modern democracies often work in the same way. You may feel like you're making free choices, but the range of choices has already been decided. And because the bread is tasty and the circus is dazzling, few ever ask to step outside the arena. We argue passionately over the small differences between the options we've been given, while the largest questions: who truly benefits from this system, what alternatives could exist, remain almost invisible. Plato would say this is another layer of the cave: shadows that are not crude distortions, but beautiful, seductive illusions. They keep you facing the wall, captivated by the play of light, while your real life, the life of a citizen capable of shaping the world, passes quietly in the dark. Chomsky's point was clear. The most effective political system is not the one that bans opposition outright, but the one that makes opposition seem irrelevant, unfashionable, or absurd. And so the citizens, full of bread and absorbed in spectacle, confuse being entertained with being free. We must ask ourselves, when was the last time you felt truly informed, not just amused or distracted? When was the last time you thought about the architecture of the system itself rather than the personalities moving within it? Bread and spectacle may keep society stable, but stability is not the same as justice. Comfort is not the same as liberty, and a democracy that relies on distraction to maintain itself is not a democracy at all. It's a polite dictatorship with better special effects. The question is, when the lights dim and the performance ends, will you still be watching the show, or will you be ready to walk out into the real world? It's election night. The results are close. People gather around their televisions, refreshing their phones, hearts pounding. Then, the announcement. A winner is declared. Cheers erupt in living rooms and public squares. People cry, hug strangers, and talk about how finally things will change. And yet, if you step back from the euphoria, something striking emerges. The emotional intensity often has less to do with policies or systems and more to do with the leader themselves. The people aren't just choosing a representative, they're choosing someone to carry their hopes, fears, and responsibilities. Sigmund Freud, in his work group Psychology and the Analysis of the Ego, observed that when individuals join a crowd, they often surrender part of their critical thinking and autonomy to the figure at the center of that crowd. That leader becomes a symbolic parent, especially a father figure, offering a sense of safety and direction in exchange for obedience. Carl Jung went further, seeing in political leaders the projection of our collective unconscious. In Jung's view, the father archetype lives deep within the human psyche. In times of uncertainty, we instinctively seek someone to embody that role, a figure of authority who will make the hard decisions for us, shield us from chaos, and reassure us that someone is in control. This isn't inherently bad. Humans are social creatures, and leadership can serve noble ends. But in the wrong hands, this desire for a father figure becomes the easiest path to manipulation, because once people project their idealized image of strength and wisdom onto a leader, they stop seeing the leader clearly. Flaws are excused, lies are forgiven, and even harmful policies are rationalized because he's doing it for our own good. Modern democracy, for all its emphasis on individual choice, still plays to this ancient psychological need. Campaigns are less about structural reform and more about cultivating a persona. Leaders are packaged as relatable yet authoritative, friendly yet commanding, a paradoxical blend designed to meet the unconscious desire for both freedom and guidance. Plato warned that in democracy, this yearning for a single guiding figure eventually leads to tyranny. Freud and Jung would add the danger doesn't begin when a tyrant seizes power. It begins when the people willingly hand over their independence for the comfort of being led. And here is where the polite nature of modern dictatorship comes in. You may never be ordered into obedience by force. Instead, you are invited into it by charisma. You may never be told what to think directly. Instead, you are shown a figure to admire so deeply that you start to think their thoughts as your own. The tragedy is that in placing so much of ourselves into the hands of one leader, we neglect the responsibilities that make democracy real, staying informed, holding leaders accountable, participating beyond election day. We become political children, waiting for Father to fix things, while quietly surrendering the agency that could have changed them ourselves. Freud would say that part of growing up psychologically is to kill the father in the symbolic sense, to stop seeking his protection, and to take responsibility for your own choices. Jung would call it integrating the father archetype within yourself so that you no longer need to project it outward. In political life, this means recognizing that no leader can or should carry the full weight of a nation's hopes. A free people must learn to carry that weight together. The question is, in your heart, do you want a leader or do you want a parent? And if it's the latter, how much freedom are you willing to give away in exchange for the comfort of being told what to do? Imagine a small town where everyone paints their house white. One day, a newcomer decides to paint theirs deep blue. Within hours, neighbors begin to drop by, smiling politely, but asking why such a strange color was chosen. By the end of the week, people at the local cafe are whispering about the blue house and how it doesn't fit the character of the neighborhood. The paint is perfectly legal, but the message is clear. You're free to be different, but you will pay a social price for it. This is the tyranny of the majority's mind, a form of control so soft and pervasive that it feels like no control at all. Alexis de Tocqueville, in his study of early American democracy, warned that the greatest danger in such societies was not the government's power, but the moral authority of the majority. Unlike an autocrat who can be seen and resisted, the majority enforces its will invisibly through approval and disapproval, through the subtle rewards of belonging and the quiet punishments of exclusion. John Stuart Mill, in On Liberty, made a similar point. Society can be as tyrannical as the political rulers when it suppresses individuality. The fear of standing apart can make people conform in ways no law could ever compel. Today, this tyranny has been amplified by technology. Social media doesn't just reflect public opinion, it accelerates and intensifies it. An unpopular opinion can be drowned in outrage within hours. A minor social misstep can be broadcast to millions. In such an environment, many people stop asking, "What is true?" and start asking, "What will keep me safe?" And safety, in the age of instant consensus, often means aligning yourself with the majority, or at least appearing to. You may think you are choosing freely, but in truth, you are navigating an invisible map drawn by the crowd's collective expectations. The tragedy is that democracy relies on dissent to stay healthy. New ideas, reforms, and moral progress almost always begin as unpopular positions. But when the tyranny of the majority takes hold, dissenters are not merely debated, they are shamed, ridiculed, or erased from public life altogether. Plato would see this as yet another form of the cave, not shadows cast by a ruling elite this time, but shadows cast by our own neighbors. We watch the wall together, agreeing on what we see, and pitying or punishing anyone who claims the light looks different. Mill's antidote was clear: protect individuality, not as a luxury, but as a necessity. A society that silences difference, even politely, is preparing the ground for intellectual stagnation and moral decay. But here's the difficulty. Resisting the majority is not just politically costly, it's emotionally costly. Humans are wired to seek belonging. Exile, even social exile, feels like a wound. The pull to agree, to blend in, to keep quiet is one of the most powerful forces in human life. So the real courage in a democracy is not simply voting or speaking at a rally or debating a policy. It is the courage to stand in the public square, literal or digital, and say something you know will be unpopular because it is true. And when you do, you may discover something remarkable. The moment one person dares to break the silence, others find the courage to do the same. The tyranny of the majority's mind begins to crumble the instant enough people realize they are not alone. The question is, in your own life, how often do you speak from conviction? And how often do you speak from the quiet, unspoken fear of being the blue house in a white neighborhood? Viktor Frankl, a psychiatrist and Holocaust survivor, once wrote, "Everything can be taken from a man but one thing, the last of the human freedoms, to choose one sip's attitude in any given set of circumstances." Frankl wasn't talking about democracy or dictatorship. He was talking about the human spirit. But his words strike at the heart of our conversation, because if modern democracy is a polite dictatorship, then the most dangerous consequence is not just the loss of political power, but the quiet surrender of our inner freedom. The Stoic philosopher Epictetus, himself once a slave, taught that while others can control your body, your possessions, even your reputation, they cannot touch your reasoned choice, your capacity to decide how to respond to the world. This inner domain, he insisted, is where true liberty lives. In a society shaped by invisible bars, curated choices, and the tyranny of appearances, reclaiming this inner domain becomes an act of resistance, because when you own your mind, you become harder to control. The slogans lose their grip, the bread loses its sweetness, the spectacle begins to look like a cheap trick. Albert Camus, the existentialist, saw freedom as an act of defiance, not in grand revolutions alone, but in the daily refusal to let the absurdity of the world strip you of dignity and agency. For Camus, the free person is not one who escapes all constraints, but one who lives consciously within them, refusing to be defined by them. What does this look like in practice? It begins with questioning, not cynically, but earnestly. When a leader speaks, you ask what is being left unsaid. When a law is passed, you ask who benefits most from this. When a new public outrage explodes online, you ask why now and what might this be distracting me from? It also means cultivating sources of meaning and identity that no political system can give or take away. Epictetus would urge you to root your peace in your own virtue, not in public approval. Camus would tell you to live as if your life is your own art, messy, unrepeatable, and defiantly yours. This inner freedom doesn't make you untouchable. You will still face pressure, disapproval, and attempts to manipulate your perception, but the difference is that you will no longer be a willing participant in your own subjugation. Plato believed that the true philosopher was always, in some sense, an exile, a person who has stepped out of the cave and seen the world as it is, and who cannot be fully at home in the illusions of the crowd. Epictetus and Camus would agree. The price of inner freedom is often a certain loneliness, but it is a noble loneliness, the kind that makes you a beacon for others still searching for the exit. And here lies the quiet paradox. The more people cultivate this inner freedom, the less effective the polite dictatorship becomes. The invisible cage begins to rust. The bread and circuses lose their flavor. The father figure loses his hold. The majority's gaze loses its power to shame. Because a society of inwardly free people cannot be ruled in the same way as a society of inwardly dependent ones. So, the final question before we close is this: are you cultivating a mind that cannot be bought, distracted, or seduced, even by the gentlest form of control? We began with a paradox that modern democracy, the system we hold up as the pinnacle of human freedom, can quietly operate as a polite dictatorship, not with soldiers in the streets, but with smiling leaders, curated choices, and narratives so skillfully crafted that we barely notice the cage we live in. Plato warned us: democracy untended becomes the soil in which tyranny grows, not because freedom itself is dangerous, but because freedom without vigilance becomes complacency, and complacency invites control. Over our journey, we uncovered six truths. First, freedom can be a cage with invisible bars. True control doesn't require force. It only requires shaping your desires so you never wish to leave. Plato's allegory of the cave remains a mirror for our times. Second, the ruler who never wears a crown. Machiavelli showed us that power often hides behind the throne, in networks, advisors, and unseen hands that shape the decisions before they reach the public stage. Third, bread, spectacle, and the illusion of choice. From Juvenal to Chomsky, we saw how distraction and comfort can pacify citizens more effectively than fear. When the menu is curated, the choice feels free but is already decided. Fourth, the crowd's desire for a father. Freud and Jung revealed that we often seek leaders to carry our fears and hopes, slipping into political childhood and surrendering responsibility for our own future. Fifth, the tyranny of the majority's mind. Tocqueville and Mill reminded us that social pressure can be as suffocating as any law, and that dissent is the lifeblood of real democracy. Sixth, the last freedom is an inner one. Epictetus and Camus taught that liberty begins in the mind, and that an inwardly free person cannot be ruled in the same way as an inwardly dependent one. So, where does this leave us? It leaves us with a choice far more personal than any election. You can live as a passive participant, content with the bread and dazzled by the circus, or you can live as a citizen in the fullest sense, awake, questioning, and unafraid to stand apart when truth demands it. The polite dictatorship thrives on your passivity. It grows stronger every time you outsource your thinking, every time you mistake entertainment for engagement, every time you let the crowd's approval dictate your voice. But it weakens, visibly, measurably, the moment you reclaim your role, when you see the bars of the invisible cage, when you refuse to be ruled by personality over principle, when you value truth over comfort, you begin to strip the system of its quiet power over you. This doesn't require grand gestures. It begins in small, deliberate acts, asking deeper questions, reading beyond the headlines, speaking your mind even when your voice shakes. It means refusing to be lulled into believing that freedom is something given to you by the state. Freedom, in its truest form, is something you claim for yourself and defend every day in how you live. Plato's philosopher leaves the cave not because it's easy, but because once you've seen the light, you can no longer pretend the shadows are enough. So here is your invitation: step outside, see clearly, and then bring as many with you as you can. If these ideas have resonated with you, I invite you to subscribe, not for me, but for the ongoing conversation we can have together. Share your reflections, challenge me, challenge each other, because the people who think together, deeply and courageously, are the hardest people in the world to rule. The polite dictatorship counts on your silence. Make it count on your voice instead.